Hi, welcome to the Unison Homeownership Podcast, where we bring in experts to break down facts and trends on real estate, finance, and homeownership. Today, I'm joined with our CEO, Thomas Sponholtz, to talk about his journey building Unison and advice that he's learned along the way. All right. Hi, Thomas. Our first podcast ever. Thanks for joining me today.
It's amazing.
Today, I want the audience to get to know a little bit about you, about our company, and just your view on homeownership in general. So with that, for those of you who don't know, Thomas is our CEO. And could you explain to us how you came up with the name Unison?
Yeah, I didn't come up with it.
Okay. We love you giving credit where credit is deserved.
Yeah, I did not come up with it. The company was first called Real Estate Equity Exchange. I came up with that. When I started the company, I was sitting around in a very large office all by myself. And I got a form where I had to fill in what's the name of the company so you can get a tax ID. And then I thought of what's the name of the company. So I was thinking about it for a couple of minutes. I said, what do? We exchange equity between the homeowner and investor. Real Estate Equity Exchange. Just put that in there.
Plain and simple.
Plain and simple. Very long. So later on, it became just way too long and a bit of a mouthful. And nobody other than me actually knew why that makes sense. I was told many times that's just too long. And then we engaged with some professionals in branding that was trying to extract what are the values, what do we do, what are the values we are, and the relationship we like to have between us and homeowners. And a big part of the way we think about a relationship is to do something in partnership together where we win and lose together. And we always try to create alignment, something very unusual in finance. But that was part of the novelty and the ambition and the vision of why it's worth doing this, why it's worth spending time every day going to work, is how do we create alignment between homeowners' biggest asset, which is both an asset but also a shelter and a place you have a family. And a home is an emotional place, it's a financial place, obviously. But how can you have alignment between you and the services that we provide? And then the word unison came up, which is a term often used in music, where you're trying to have an orchestra all play the same note at somewhat the same time in unison. And we thought, unison is good. It's slightly unusual, but it's not too long. And we do something in unison. We do something together.
Yeah.
And so we thought that captures the relationship and the tone, if you will, to go back to music, of the kind of business that we have created.
I really like your analogy of music. I think it works really well with just not only the synonym of having everything in line, but I would say even as a company, when we work, we're always trying to align all of our different teams together. And that even relates to the name of the product.
I haven't thought about that. That's a good analogy. Like we're the orchestra.
Yeah.
And we all have
all of our
to
different teams
play this piece of music together in order for it to sound good.
Yeah, definitely.
And in order to deliver something.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, never thought of that. Good idea. Maybe you'll do the next branding.
Maybe I should.
Of our next product.
Speaking of names, in our San Francisco office, we have a bunch of different conference rooms. And I might even add, they all have fantastic views of the city. So with that, if someone was just joining Unison, one of the most common side comments that we hear is, oh, what room are we meeting in? And then we're like, oh, it's NITROM 1 or something like that. So we have very interesting names for meeting rooms in our office.
Right.
We have things like Valhalla, NITROM, Asgard. How did you come up with that? Or is this another situation where credit is due somewhere else?
Partly. So this is a mix. So I'm from Denmark, and it really comes from just the inheritance of Vikings that had a certain mythology around their way of living. And in the Nordic mythology, there are different stages of life on Earth. And our conference rooms are, for the many parts, just named after the different states of Earth. So Valhalla is the place where the living gods occupy themselves and drink beer and have meals. It's a living god, so they're still human and alive. So that's Valhalla is a big conference room, a big boardroom with the best view of this beautiful city. And then we have Asgard, which is one step down from holiness. And then you have one of our products is named Midgard. And it's named Midgard because that's the earthly livable place. And so that's Midgard. That's where humans live. So we named one of our funds Midgard because it's where houses are, it's where people are. So that's the background. So we stuck with that. We went a little bit off the rails because I was asked, what do we want to call these conference rooms? And I had 3 ideas. And then life went on and I keep doing what we need to do. But then there was 3 additional conference rooms. And the person that was going to name them came to me and said, I can't focus on this right now. And then she just came up with NITROM 1, 2, and 3. And do you know what that means?
I don't.
It means new room.
Does it?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
New unnamed room. So it's unnamed room 1
Yeah.
and 2 and 3. We had those 3 conference rooms. So I won't take credit for that part. Yeah.
That's very clever, though.
I think the whole intention was we need to name them later. And that's 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah, and now they've really stuck, and we just know
Now
exactly.
we can't.
I
That
think
is the name.
we're a little past that point now.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. We can't do it. But again, now that you're a branding expert,
we'll come back.
You might be on that assignment.
Maybe we'll get some comments or suggestions from the audience
That's
about
a good
what
idea.
we should name them as well.
That's a good
so
idea.
if you have ideas, let us know.
Yeah.
I also wanted to touch on housing in general, especially for my peers and I. A lot of us are thinking about buying a house and what that would look like. And with the state of the world, sometimes it's something that's scary for a lot of people, putting down such a large down payment and not knowing if you're going to be able to make these monthly payments, and it taking such a large portion of your monthly income.
Yeah.
So with that, I've had a lot of conversations with my friends about whether we should rent a house or if we should own a house. Do you have any advice that you could give to me or someone like me who's interested in buying a house?
I think you touched on something that's very true, which is it's scary. But I will add to that, it's also hopefully a warm, heartfelt feeling, because I think most people are not buying their house because it's a financial asset. I don't think people, including myself, when I bought my first house, I'm not thinking about buying land and a dwelling. I'm thinking about having a home and the experiences of having a home, whether it's where you feel yourself and your true personality and you build a family or have your dog. And, it's a very warm, very human place, right? It's one of the first things we ever own. And it's a sense of place. And it's an emotional place. And that has just evolved to now also being the biggest financial asset that people typically own. And along with buying this big financial assets, most people have to take out a loan or mortgage. And along with the mortgage comes an obligation to make payments, and then it becomes scary. And then you need homeownership insurance and maintenance and property taxes. All of that is just a lot. So I think about it really as the advice is follow the emotional attraction of owning a home first. Mm-hmm. Don't do it for the financial aspect. That's me speaking as one person. The next person will say you should buy a house because it's a good financial decision. Nothing in America, and I believe Europe, has made more people financially well off than owning a house. So it also happened to historically have been a financially sound decision. Personally, I think you got to lead with, I want a home. I can speak for myself. I bought my first home when my wife and I became pregnant. It's like I never thought about owning a home before. I was like, no, but just didn't think about it. All of a sudden, it's like, whoa, family, kid. The sense of home and a place to belong to your family became really important. And immediately, I got to go out and buy a house. And then all the fear factor kicked in you described, right? But then I think the emotional side has to overcome the fear. And that's when you know you're ready. That would probably be the advice.
That actually makes a lot of sense, because I think traditionally there are a lot of people that might say, oh, you should graduate college, find a job, save for a house, buy a house, get married, et cetera, et cetera. But it is the idea of a house is just a dwelling until you make it something more, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I agree. What about...
It's what you make of it, right? And it comes down to what is the experience of life that's important to me at this stage? And the house, that has to be what lead your idea of making such a big commitment, I think.
Yeah.
Because you have different level of flexibility on the other side. Right now you're obligated to meet all these obligations, and that might be okay if you have a family because you know you're staying there anyway. That would be my advice. If you emotionally feel this is what you want, then that should overcome the financial fear. And if it doesn't, then you're probably not ready yet.
That's true. And I think for my peers and I know that we'll look at a house and sometimes you can really, what you're saying, envision yourself in this house with, say in your situation, it was like your wife, dogs, kids, you can really envision yourself in it, versus other times you're like, oh, like it's fine. Like maybe it's the next thing that I should do. And it doesn't resonate with you as well. What was your home buying journey? Was it something that was super quick? Did you have to do 1,000,001 open houses?
It was long. We knew exactly where we wanted to live. And like in today's market, there wasn't a lot of houses for sale. So we shopped around a lot before we found something that just felt right. So it took a lot. It took a long time. And my wife found the house. One day she called me. I was on a business trip and said, I found the house and I'm buying it tomorrow. She knew. And I said, I'm not home tomorrow. And she said, I know. I'm just giving you a heads up. But it's right. And after we've been shopping for so long, she knows also what I wanted and what we wanted. And she was spot on. Yeah. So she made the big decision, and yeah, it was perfect. I bought one house and I still own that house. That's 27 years ago.
She really knew. She
really knew. She really knew.
So earlier you touched on the topic of rates. So bringing it back 20 years forward, where do you think rates are going moving forward? And with that, kind of tying it back with people who are interested in buying a house, is that something that they should be worried about? Or do you think it's something that, kind of like what you touched on earlier, when you know that it's time and it's this next stage in your life, you just need to take that step forward?
Yeah. Can I add to that question?
Yeah, of course.
I think there's rates and then there's just home prices, right? So I will say, if we could just stop, because I remember when I bought a house, everybody was saying, well, it's so expensive. There's no way this could be a good investment. It's just way too expensive. And again, that was 27 years ago. And I have never not heard people saying it's way too expensive. Mm-hmm. So I would say that they're always going to seem too expensive. So you almost can't listen to that. The price is the price. Like, you can move somewhere else and it might be cheaper or more expensive. But if you know where you want to live, it's just the price. And that's the market dictates that. So I would say you just can't worry about it. Interest rates, again, something you can't forecast. If you put it in historic perspective, in contrast, home prices seems to always go up over time a little bit. It follows the expansion of the economy and the population, wages. Interest rates are different, right? It goes up and down. Historic perspective, we have come out of a couple of years ago, we came out of a long period of the lowest rates we ever seen. And we became used to having really low interest rates. And that became the benchmark or the anchor for our expectation for what rates should be. And then rates rose, and today, first mortgage is around 7%. And back then it was 3%, just a few years ago. In historic perspective, I just want to point out, that's probably close to the average historically. Maybe a little bit higher, but not much. So is it high? It's just average, but it's higher than what your most recent memory would suggest. So as humans, the most recent memory weighs a lot more than the distant historic fact. So I would say, if you can afford it and it's the right emotional decision for you to buy a house and you love the place and you have high conviction, then just do it. Yeah. And then the benefit of the U.S. mortgage market is, if rates drop, you can refinance at a lower rate. Well, rates can also go up, right? And then you wish that you bought when they were lower. So I would say it's an emotional place. And if you can afford it and it feels right, then it probably is right.
Yeah. And I think there's a reason people always say, I think it's like hindsight vision is 20/20. Like, you can always say, I wish I bought it then, or I wish I sold then, or refinanced then. But at the end of the day, these are the current cards that you were dealt, and you just need to figure out how to play within that space.
That's it. And don't forget, there's also, the government does a lot to support home ownership in terms of the deductibility of interest rates. And it's somewhat subsidized by the government. So there are incentives, financial incentives, that make the rates potentially a little bit more overcomable, if that's an English word. But it is scary. But again, if it's right for you and you can afford it, probably is a good idea.
So then, with what you mentioned about how rates and home prices are often, or is not often, just straight it is out of the homeowner's control or the prospective homeowner's control, what then got you to start a company like Unison then? So knowing that prices are set by the markets and interest rates are set, also government/market, how did that transition into you starting a home equity company?
If you start from the very top, in finance, for example, if you have a company, you can finance with debt and equity. You can issue bonds or you can have equity. Somebody who starts a company rarely has the financial means to just use their own money to buy the company. So they go out and raise some company from family, friends, venture funds and whatever, to get additional shareholders, to get some cash in the business to start it. So you have shareholders. I thought, why can't we do that in finance? Around the house. Why do you have to own the whole house just because you live there? So it was really the idea that the old idea is you have to own the whole house if you want to live there. But in other places in finance, and I used in this case the example of a company, you just own as much as you can afford, and then you issue stock and sell that to somebody else. So you have shareholders. Why in a house can you not have other people that own a share of it, and then you own the rest of it? And the idea is that since homes, coming back now to your question, since homes are so expensive, and since it is such a large part of your personal financial situation, what if you can adjust how much you own by having equity as being something you can sell equity, buy them out, but you can actually use equity and debt to better adjust what this house actually cost you. So for example, let's say you bought a house 10 years ago and like many Americans, it appreciated. Now you have a lot of equity in the house, but you can't really use that equity for anything unless you sell the house or borrow more money against it. Why can't you issue stock? I have some other people own a piece of the house and you get the cash so that it's not such a big part of your home finance, so that you can send your kids to school, or you can make the home improvement, or God forbid you have a medical debt, you can pay it off. The point is that the equity needs to be an active part of your net worth, not just something that's locked up in bricks and mortar, like it is everywhere else in finance. You have debt and equity, and that should be liquid. The idea really came because, as I said, I bought a house, and it was expensive, and it was scary, but it was for certain I needed to buy a house. But I thought about, why do I need to own the whole house? What if I have somebody else who can enjoy the appreciation alongside of me? And then I buy a little bit less house, but I take care of it. That was really just the emphasis of kind of the idea. So why do we need equity? Because everywhere else you have debt and equity, and everybody's better off. If you, as a homeowner, to take that, you can adjust how much debt you need, how much equity you want to own or not own, and you're just more in control as a homeowner.
Yeah, it gives the homeowner a lot more flexibility.
And control is a big part too. So you can do something about it rather than have to sell the house.
Yeah, exactly. Because similar to what you touched on, I think one term that has gotten really popular throughout the last few years is being housebroke. Yeah. So it's the idea, housebroke, oftentimes people think of someone who just bought a house. So I just bought a house and now I'm housebroke. But I think this terminology can be used for anyone, even if you've owned a house for 10 years, like you said, but then now you have medical bills and maybe you're sending your kids to college, whatever it may be. Yeah. And now, once again, you're back to feeling housebroke. It's not just something that you feel in the first 1 to 2 years of buying a house. It can be a recurring emotion that happens.
Yeah, life happens. It costs money. Yeah. Right? And inflation has kicked in lately, so now it costs even more money.
Yeah.
But inflation has also benefited your home price, but you can't benefit from it. So you should be able, now I thought it's very simple, it's like you should be able to access the equity in your house. And that can be whether you just take it out and use it, as you talked about, for home improvement, retirement, and just to make it flexible and put you in control. It can also just be, why can't we use equity to reduce the interest rate you pay every month? It's just making it an active part of your net worth. Again, in the rest of finance, in other asset classes, that's debt and equity. We just want to make it the same. And that creates a lot of value, and it creates this alignment between us and the homeowner, because if there's equity involved, we both want the house to do well.
Yeah, yeah.
So in unison, in alignment, we both benefit, right? So we have the same ambition.
Yeah.
Something that's very unusual in finance. And just to take one step further, it's unfortunate that it's the system around the home and finance has just been debt and more debt. And I think so debt was invented in the 1400s, the mortgage, right? And then they were brought to America with the settlers. So I think it was around the 1700s, the first mortgage, late 1700s, the first mortgage introduced in America. And since then, there's been no innovation. It's just debt or more debt or different type of debt. Wait a minute, let's do what everybody else did, right? Mm-hmm. And then around that, you build regulators that control home finance, and all they think about is debt, and everything has to be debt. And then you have the banks that are lending the money, they're also regulated, but all around debt. So it became really difficult to do anything else. It just was, because it's locked into the system. Mm-hmm. So a big part of our system, our ambition is to just break that and say, hey, modern finance have figured out a way to do this smarter. And that's what we're doing. It's just a smarter way to own a house.
Yeah.
When you buy it, or when you own it, or when you just want to stay there as your last house. Yeah. The two together makes a more optimal solution.
Before, people got a house in exchange for debt and an extra side of debt.
Exactly. How do you feel now?
Just ready to buy a house now.
Exactly. Now that is scary, right? Yeah. That is scary. But it doesn't have to be, because you actually own too much house. Reduce some of that exposure. Or diversify. Sell a piece of your house and buy stocks if you don't have enough savings. Save for the rainy day. Have a little bit of cash available. So if something happens, you sell your stock and make your mortgage payments and pay for other things in your life. It's just having that liquidity access. Safety makes a lot of sense. And these are not things we came up with, just to be very clear. This is something the rest of the world has figured out. What we did was simply to apply it to home ownership, because every homeowner owns too much, and it's the largest financial and most fundamental asset in the economy, and it needed to be more efficient.
Yeah, you touched on earlier just now about how when you have a lot of debt, you also should find ways to, one, be a little bit more flexible using alternative methods. And with that, also diversifying your investments, whether that is investing in stock or keeping cash. I also wanted to touch and get your advice on the best and worst financial advice that you've received. Is there something that you've heard throughout your career, wherever it may be, that you're like, oh, that really resonates with me? Or were you like, wow, I got this horrible advice and nobody should listen to it?
Wow. I might have to think about that a little bit.
Okay. We can also save it.
Actually, why don't we start with you? What's the best and worst advice you have got?
I would say so far, the best advice is to focus on my credit score. Like whether that may be making sure that all the credit card balances are low, opening credit cards every 6 to 12 months to increase the available credit that can be used and decreasing credit utilization. But I would say that probably has helped me the most because that takes time. Like I can't just go out and open 6 credit cards today. Yeah. Like that would just absolutely tank my credit score. So hearing that advice early and being able to spread out necessary functions in order to at least have a stable credit score, I think has been super helpful, especially a few years ago. I wasn't in a position where I can just buy a house as an asset and then buy a bunch of stock. I didn't have that ability.
Right.
And something like maintaining a good credit score more or less does not cost you anything. Right. You know, don't get a bunch of credit cards and blow them all up. More or less, if you do it in a controlled fashion, it can be extremely beneficial for you. And then later on, when I am ready to buy a house, that credit would be a lot more stable and I'd be in a much better place.
Yeah, I think that's really sound advice, actually. As you were talking about that, I thought about a couple of other ones. Some I learned, and I have 2 sons in the late 20s, and so they're like professionals and now starting to make a little bit of money and have to figure out what to do with it. And neither of them were in finance. Study the incentives of who you're doing business with. If it's around your investment, like if I'm giving my money to this person to help me manage my money, what's their incentive? If you understand the incentives, that's where it ends up. And you just want to make sure that's aligned with yours. I would say this law of incentives is very important. And then there's just understanding the difference between investing and gambling. Right? Because as humans, we think we can do better than average, but 98% of investment managers underperform the average if it's stocks S&P 500. So do you really think you can beat the S&P 500 not having the resources of all these smart investors in the world? So incentives, and also I would just say diversify and understand the difference between gambling and investing.
Do you have a particular large moment in your life where you really understood someone's incentive and that worked in your favor?
Yeah, this is a silly example, but when I first came to the United States, my first job in finance, I was hired as what they called, I think it was an analyst position. Basically, I was modeling all these securities and everything else, and it was very confusing to me because coming straight from Denmark to Wall Street is quite a gap. And from university, there was a moment where I started thinking about why do these people do the things they do? Management of the firm had very clearly lined up the incentives. If you make these transactions that do this, then you get that. It was just very crystal clear. I understood America very clearly. From that moment, the incentives were very clear. In this case, financial incentives. There are many other types of incentives, but financial incentives, if you understand those, you know what the outcome is going to be. And I think just accepting that, not just logically, but intuitively, always have that red flag is really helpful. And that was the first time it became very clear to me.
That is a good example. And I think that's probably the example that a lot of people would resonate with, right? Even when it's applying for a job, understanding like, this is the amount that someone wants to pay me. And in return, this is what they're trying to accomplish. And this is how I can make their life easier or bring them value.
I think that's one more, especially in younger years, is just understand that you probably do much better financially by focusing on your career and doing your job than trying to get all excited about your 401k or your investment portfolio and trying to optimize that. Your return on time and expertise is very high in focusing on the job.
Should we skip the negative side? Maybe we can circle back for that one of the worst financial advice or worst career advice that you've received.
Yeah, this is just my experience. Yeah, I'm just one person, right? There's a lot of people that do what you think you're interested in professionally. Follow your interest in all that kind of stuff. And like you go to university and say, I'm interested in studying and what job do I want afterwards? And that's true throughout life, right? I actually don't think you have any idea. You might have an idea, but I think really just being around good people and being able to pay your bills and get food can be a lot of value and a lot of really important things. And later on in life, it's something else. It's taking care of your family, for example, right? Or it's saving up for a house. So I think probably the worst advice I've gotten is you should just do what you're really interested in, because that's just one moment in time, whereas you change what you're interested in constantly.
Yeah.
Right? And if I do that every day, I'm not sure I end up somewhere where I want to go.
I could definitely agree with that. In college, I definitely had no idea what home equity appreciation loans and all these terminologies. Definitely didn't think that I'd be on a podcast.
You're natural.
And definitely didn't think that I'd be a licensed mortgage loan originator. So I can 100% agree that it makes sense. Just try something out and try to do your best in it, but it's not always going to be your favorite thing or your biggest hobby or something that you thought about 10 years ago.
I think that's utopic and very rare. Work with good people. I think that's probably as good as it gets. I will say that it is a good idea to have a mission you believe in, because otherwise it's not very motivating. And that's where I think you get like the extra gear of your performance and your interest in, but you also get more out of it.
With that, did you have something or a career path that you wanted to do as a kid? Was there like a passion project, whether that's like being a superhero, an astronaut, a firefighter? Did you have anything like that?
I changed so many times. Yes, I thought I wanted to be a professional sailboat racer. And then I figured out at some point I needed to probably have a little bit of a career. And I went to study architecture. And then I thought that was going to be it. And then I figured out there's 92% unemployment in Denmark for architects at the time. So I changed to engineering. And that failed. I failed miserably at that. I was just bored. And then I went sailing and windsurfing professionally. And then I got tired of that. And then I went to university to study economics. I studied emerging market economics. And I thought that's what I was going to do. And that was my first job was related to that. And that's something I'm still very passionate about. And that led to what I do today. So I think you can't figure out what the red thread or whatever it is through life and career really is. You just have to keep pursuing.
I love how you casually snuck in there that you're a professional sailboat racer. And we just totally moved past that from there. It's something that I think we should talk about more.
Yeah, but the point is that you have different ideas about what's right to do at that time, and you just got to pursue it. Mm-hmm. So building this business is definitely something that just came up, and it makes a ton of sense one day. It's, whoa, this needs to exist. And hopefully other people think it needs to exist too, right? So I think what we do is very important. It's important to me, and I think hopefully other people too. So you pursue it. So it's not one time, it's many times that happens. So I think that's the same for everybody.
All right. Thank you so much for your time today, Thomas. It was very insightful hearing your experience building Unison and all of the advice that you were able to give for people who are interested in buying a house. With that, is there anything that you want to leave with the audience before we close out here?
I think we covered a lot of things, and we'll do it again.
Great. I hope to see you back on the podcast.
Thank you.